I knew something was off when Greg brought out the champagne before noon. He's not a before noon kind of guy. He's a coffee-flavored smug kind of guy, with the personality of a corporate mission statement and the loyalty of a coupon that expired yesterday. We just wrapped the Q3 demo for the internal tool I'd been building since the pandemic. What started as a hacky band-aid for back-end chaos had grown into the only product in the company that investors actually cared about. A clean, profitable, SaaS revenue stream that made the CFO sit up straight and murmur the words repeatable MRR like he'd discovered religion. My team had pulled 2 all-nighters to get the demo environment stable. I personally ran the investor walkthrough. I wrote the pitch deck. I fielded questions from people with 10-figure funds and zero patience. And now here we were, in the glass fishbowl of the office kitchen, while Greg clinked a spoon against his flute and grinned like a man about to get his face bronzed. I have some exciting news, he said, arm draped around Mark, who still had the Red Bull shakes and the code merge history of a raccoon with access to a keyboard. We're officially spinning out the platform as its own product line, and I can't think of anyone better to lead it than Mark. I blinked, once, twice. Thought maybe he meant Mark would lead the DevOps side or maybe serve as technical liaison while I focused on investor relations. But no, Greg kept going. Brenda here trained him so well, he said, nodding at me like I was a proud soccer mom. It only made sense. She's been an incredible mentor, and Mark's ready to fly. The room clapped, I think. Couldn't hear much past the rush of blood in my ears. I stood there smiling, glass in hand, while they toasted my product, my roadmap, my baby, handed over like a housewarming gift to the intern I'd been babysitting for 14 months. Hey, quick pause if you're enjoying this story so far. Give it a like and hit subscribe. You'd be surprised how many people listen without subscribing, and honestly, your support keeps stories like this going. It really helps the team. Anyway, Greg raised his glass to innovation, and Mark gave a little speech about standing on the shoulders of giants, which was rich coming from a guy who thought Jason was a type of salad dressing when I met him. The real kicker, he had the gall to thank me, said I showed him what leadership looks like, that I paved the way. I half expected him to hand me a bouquet and a retirement watch. Afterward, in the hallway, people gave me these soft, guilty smiles. One product manager patted my shoulder like I had just gotten laid off from my own company. And in a way, I had. Except I was still there, still salaried, still expected to support the transition. Greg called it a gentle evolution of responsibility. I called it something else entirely, though not out loud. The next day, I walked into the team stand-up meeting to find that Mark had changed the meeting title to Platform Sync with Mark. My calendar permissions had been quietly downgraded. He smiled when I walked in, said something about streamlining leadership visibility. I stared at him so hard the projector glitched. By Friday, my name had vanished from the demo deck. Monday morning, I was asked to give a knowledge transfer walkthrough of our client analytics integrations. ACA, the part of the product I'd architected with 3 whiteboards, 1 legal pad, and an actual stress nosebleed. Mark didn't take notes. He scrolled Slack during half of it, and when I asked if he wanted documentation, he said, only if you have time. I had plenty of time, they'd made sure of that. That night I went home, poured a glass of wine, and opened the contracts folder on my personal laptop. Not the work laptop. Mine. The one I used back in 2020. And Greg begged me to whip together a prototype in my spare time because the product team was swamped and we were hemorrhaging clients. Back when there was no budget, no roadmap, no belief it would go anywhere, I scrolled, found the file, Brenda IP Licensing Agreement PDF, and suddenly my smile wasn't so fake anymore. I read the contract 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating out of spite. But no, there it was. Section 3.2, buried in legal mulch and mid-pandemic desperation. License shall remain non-transferable without written approval from the original licenser. And that licenser? Yours truly. Not the company, not Greg. Me. Flashback to April 2020. Remember that phase of the apocalypse when we were all pretending banana bread and Zoom trivia could fix capitalism? Greg had called me at 9:47 p.m. on a Sunday. That he had a tiny ask while the engineers were juggling 5 client fires and half the office was furloughed. He needed a fast way to patch our backend mess and stop the customer churn that was bleeding us dry. Said I could prototype something over the weekend, whatever you can scrape together. So I did. Out of boredom, loyalty, and the kind of burned-out obligation you feel when your name is still on a shared Slack channel called #survival mode. I built the bones of what eventually became the product they were now trying to sell without me. But back then, it was just code I built at home, on my machine, using my own AWS credits and a third-party API license tied to my name and my consulting LLC because finance couldn't spare a dime. I remembered emailing Greg a formal agreement a few days later. It was clean, simple. My LLC would license the core tech to the company on a rolling basis, renewable quarterly, revocable with notice, and absolutely non-transferable unless I signed off. Greg, in his classic just get me the damn deck panic, E-signed it without reading past the subject line. Never even forwarded it to legal. And then forgot about it until now. I sat there on my couch, that contract glowing on my laptop screen, and realized what a delicious little time bomb I'd built. Not out of malice, just necessity. We were broke, and I didn't want the liability of tying personal software into company infrastructure without a paper trail. But now that very paper trail was a tripwire. I pulled out my notebook, the one I only used when I needed to think in ink, wrote one word across the top of the page: leverage, not revenge, not sabotage. Leverage, cold, clean, legal. I dug deeper, looked through every contract, every SOW, every QBR document I'd ever signed. There it was again, in the fine print of the series A Tech Memo. I'd been listed as third-party licensor in an appendix no one ever cited. And when we brought in a third-party code auditor last year, I'd flagged the license dependency myself in the compliance worksheet. In writing, which meant even if they tried to pretend they forgot, the trail was there. Dotted line pointing right back to me. I opened a new browser tab and typed in the name of my IP attorney, Cara Benson. We hadn't talked since she helped me set up the LLC, but her business card was still taped to my old filing cabinet like a lucky charm. Shot her a short email. Subject: quick question on IP licensing clause, need confirmation on transfer restrictions. Attach the doc. Click send. I wasn't mad anymore. Mad is for people without options. I had something better. I had a gate. And Greg was about to walk face first into it. The next morning I got her reply. Hi Brenda, reviewed the doc. You're correct. They cannot sell or assign the product IP without your written authorization. If they've initiated any discussions, you have full right to halt or renegotiate. I stared at that line, full right to halt or renegotiate. It was like someone handing me a scalpel and saying, you know where to cut. That night I didn't sleep. I schemed. I wasn't going to scream or beg or write some self-righteous LinkedIn post about being overlooked. I wasn't going to storm back and demanding an apology while Greg patted my head and offered a severance muffin. No, I'd already been erased in public. Now it was my turn to erase them from their own narrative. And I'd do it the same way they tried to erase me: quietly, efficiently, with paperwork. I handed Greg my resignation letter the same way you'd drop a napkin into a campfire, calm, casual, knowing it would eventually burn through something important. Just wanted to say thank you, I said, forcing the sweetest tone I could manage without throwing up in my mouth. It's been an honor contributing to the growth of the platform. Greg didn't even lift his eyes from the mock pitch deck he was walking Mark through. Appreciate you, Brenda, he mumbled, clicking through slides like he was already scraping me off the org chart. You're a class act. I smiled, nodded, and turned to leave. Behind me, Mark asked some vague question about product vision, which Greg answered with the smug assurance of a man who once called a relational database just another Google sheet. I paused for half a second in the hallway, listening to the sound of my erasure. Then I kept walking. Back at my desk, I pulled out a recycled cardboard box from under the monitor. The one HR had handed me 2 years ago during a reorg scare, which I'd kept as a joke. Guess the joke had a punchline after all. I slid in a few things: the mini cactus from my window ledge, my own Logitech mouse, the company-issued one was possessed, a framed photo of me and my team at the product's first rollout, back when we were still scrappy, still ours. No one stopped me. No hushed gossip, no panicked whispers. Just a few polite head tilts and weak goodbyes. Most people figured I was doing what women in tech always do: when we get steamrolled, we move on. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't moving on. I was moving under. Quiet, strategic, like a root system beneath their shiny little startup sprout. I walked out the front doors with my box cradled in one arm, purse slung over the other, and a smile on my face that had more teeth than warmth. Behind me, Greg was probably slapping Mark on the back, congratulating him on earning his wings or some other airborne metaphor for inherited power. And somewhere in his email drafts was a glowing announcement about the new product lead, buzzwords like visionary, bold thinker, and the next phase of our evolution. They thought I was gone. They thought I'd take my little thank you LinkedIn post and slink into the next startup like a good girl. Maybe go consult, maybe teach a class, maybe start a podcast about women in leadership that they'd pretend to subscribe to but never listen. Instead, I went home, popped open a la croix like it was champagne, and pulled up my IP attorney's second email. Cara had sent over a new template, an updated license agreement that would give my LLC even more teeth. Specifically, a clause that required dual-party authentication for any sale, merger, or derivative licensing involving the core tech. Meaning, no wire transfers, no pitch decks, no contract signatures unless I said yes. And I wasn't saying yes. Not yet, not until the exact right moment. I filed the agreement under a new folder, Contingency V2, added a sticky note to my monitor. You built the bones, you own the blood. Then I did something radical. I sent Greg a thank you gift, a branded hoodie from his favorite VC firm with Mark 2.0 embroidered on the sleeve. The kind of passive-aggressive parting shot that looks like affection until you zoom in on the sarcasm. The email said, wishing the new team all the success in the world. excited to see where the platform goes next. No smiley face, no emojis. Just that night, I logged into LinkedIn and switched my profile headline to currently exploring new opportunities in strategic product licensing, which was technically true. I was exploring opportunities. I just hadn't decided who would be allowed to survive mine. It's funny what you can do in total silence. When you stop defending yourself, when you stop explaining your worth to men who think mentorship means polite theft. I spent the next 72 hours doing what Greg and Mark would never expect, nothing visible. No angry emails, no social posts, no late night texts asking for clarity or closure. Just me, a legal pad, and a bottle of Pinot I'd been saving for the day I either quit or committed tax fraud. First thing I did was call Kara, my IP attorney, the one with the voice like a news anchor and the patience of a pissed-off librarian. She picked up on the second ring. "I've got a licensing update for you," I said. "Need a clause added." Quietly, she chuckled. "How nuclear are we talking?" "Think detonation upon contact." I sent her the revised agreement before we hung up. It was short, surgical. The original license already blocked transfer without my consent, but now I was adding language that made the whole thing hair trigger sensitive. Any attempt to sell, assign, or repurpose the platform would trigger an automatic freeze until I provided signed release. Not just a delay, a lock. Technically, it would send the product into a legal limbo no buyer in their right mind would touch. And because I filed it through my LLC, separate from my employment contract, it lived outside the walls of HR or internal compliance. Greg's team would have to dig through a spiderweb of release forms, version control, and legacy architecture to even find the clause. Spoiler, they wouldn't. Meanwhile, I refreshed Crunchbase and caught a glimpse of what was coming. A certain tech conglomerate, let's call them Voltrex, had just scooped up a similar company in the HR compliance space. I knew from an old colleague that Voltrex had been sniffing around for a product like ours for months. Clean code base, scalable API, already tested with enterprise clients. I scrolled through Twitter and found Greg on stage at a SAW Founders panel, tagged by someone with the caption, "Love this founder's vision." I clicked the video. Greg was talking about creating room for young leaders to thrive, while Mark stood behind him nodding like a bobblehead in startup cosplay. I could practically smell the cologne Greg wears for VC meetings, the one that tries to say refined masculinity, but really screams divorced twice by 39. I closed the tab and reopened my licensing dashboard. My LLC, Cobalt Point Systems, was now listed as active vendor with a direct link to the revised license. The timestamp, immaculate, the audit trail, ironclad. I wasn't going to stop the deal. That would be too loud, too obvious. No, I wanted them to walk right into it. I wanted Voltrex's legal team to lean back in their Herman Miller chairs and say, "Excuse me, but who owns this again?" That's the magic of leverage. It's not a weapon, it's a switch. You just wait until someone grabs the wrong handle. By Thursday, word around the old Slack channels was that Greg had flown out to San Francisco for something big. Mark's calendar was blocked for investor prep, and the company's PR firm had started ghostwriting LinkedIn posts about legacy products and new chapters. It was adorable, like watching two toddlers build a rocket out of cardboard and optimism. And me? I was at a local print shop, getting a single copy of the updated license printed, bound, and placed in a matte black folder. It had weight, gravitas, the kind of folder you slide across a glass conference table when you want someone to realize they've made a mistake. The clerk asked if it was for court. I smiled and said, "Worse. Tech bros, back home." I slipped the folder into my filing cabinet and added a post-it that read, "Deliver on signing day." Then I poured a glass of wine, propped my feet up, and listened to the voicemail Greg left at 9:12 p.m. "Hey, just wanted to say no hard feelings, Mark's gonna do great, but we're all super grateful for the foundation you laid. Hope you're doing well. We may reach out down the line if we need any clarifications on the code handoff. Cheers." Clarifications. That word rattled around in my head like a marble in an empty glass. They didn't need clarification. They needed consent, and they weren't getting it. Not until the deal was close enough for them to taste it. Then and only then would I show my hand. The company Slack lit up like a Christmas tree on cocaine. Screenshots, emojis, big news coming. Someone even uploaded a gif of champagne exploding out of a bottle. In my day, we used words. Now it's all animated pixels and delusion. A well-placed whisper confirmed it. Voltrex was circling. The same conglomerate that once gobbled up 5 workflow startups in a single quarter and turned them into a product suite with matching logos and soul deep regret. They had money, they had clout, and most importantly, they had blind spots. Greg, of course, couldn't keep his mouth shut. He was practically vibrating with secondhand power, floating through meetings like he'd already gotten his yacht license. "This acquisition will define our legacy," he said to one investor on a podcast. Like the man had ever opened a GitHub repo without panicking. I'd left the company Slack 2 weeks prior, but an old coworker, Amy, who now ran DevOps at a fintech firm, texted me a photo from an investor dinner she happened to crash. Mark standing in front of a slide titled, "The Road Ahead." Underneath, Bullet points about vision, product market fit, and Mark's leadership experience. Not a single mention of me. I zoomed in. In the corner of the slide was a tiny version number, Deck V9B Final Really Final 2, PPTX. Classic. Amy added, he told someone he wrote the original API schema. I laughed so hard I dropped my wine. It should have stung. It should have felt like erasure. But honestly, all it did was confirm what I already knew. They were building a castle on my bones, and they had no idea the foundation was wired for detonation. No credit? Fine. I didn't want to thank you. I didn't need a founder emeritus plaque or some flowery paragraph in a press release. I didn't need Greg's empty praise or Mark's condescending nods. I had something better. I had the trap, and they were now running toward it. By Friday, chatter leaked that the Voltrex acquisition was days from closing. I watched it unfold like a nature documentary. Greg and Mark strutting across conference rooms in matching button-downs, their LinkedIn bios suddenly updated to include phrases like thought leadership and transformation architect. Greg started calling himself a serial builder. The only thing Greg had built in the last year was a team of people to clean up after him. Voltrex's due diligence team had apparently begun poking around the infrastructure docs. I knew the platform inside out, I knew what they'd ask, and more importantly, I knew what they wouldn't find. Because the one document that mattered most, the one that governed the legal right to sell the platform, wasn't in their Confluence folders. It wasn't in the data room. It wasn't anywhere near their neat little pitch deck pipeline. It was in my filing cabinet. Stamped, updated, mutable, and when that freeze clause kicked in, they'd realize they were trying to sell a car without the title. A shiny, expensive Tesla with no registration and a very angry previous owner sitting quietly in the background, sipping wine and watching them play chicken with a brick wall. Still, I stayed silent. No calls. No emails, no last-minute concerns raised with legal. Let them get close. Let Greg book the hotel conference room for the signing ceremony. Let him practice the handshake in the mirror. Let Mark imagine the LinkedIn post that would go viral for all the wrong reasons. I printed one more copy of the license agreement, this time on ivory linen paper, tucked it into the matte black folder under a fresh label, to be opened when they forget who built it. Then I set it aside, right next to my coffee mug that read, "Not today, gaslighter." I wasn't bitter. I was ready. The bar smelled like lime peel, spilled ambition, and whatever cologne white-collar men marinate in before closing a nine-figure deal. One of those sleek places downtown where the menus are printed in gold foil and the cocktails have names like Fiscal Atonement or the Hedge Fund Widow. I was already on my second drink by the time she walked in, Laura Haynes, lead counsel for Voltrex's M and a due diligence team. Blazer crisp. Laptop bag that probably cost more than my first car. She scanned the bar with the cold efficiency of a woman who doesn't suffer fools or full inboxes, then spotted me in the corner booth and approached like a lawyer approaching anything, with polite suspicion and bulletproof posture. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't pretend this was a social call. She just slid into the booth and said, "You asked for 10 minutes. I'll only need 2, I replied, reaching into my purse. I pulled out a simple white card, matte finish. One line printed across the center in black serif. Before you wire the funds, check Schedule C, Clause 9. No logo, no signature, just that. Laura took the card and tilted her head slightly, the way you do when you spot a landmine and aren't sure which wire to step over. She didn't ask me to explain. She just stared at it like it might whisper secrets if she held it long enough. "That's it?" she asked after a pause. I nodded. "You're very good at your job. I trust you'll find it." Then I stood up, tossed a 20 on the table, generosity or guilt, I couldn't tell, and walked out without another word. Let her chase the thread. Back in the Uber, I refreshed the company news alerts. Voltrex's legal department had been in town for 3 days already. Greg had made a show of hosting them at the office, complete with catered sushi and a vinyl banner that read "The future is now." Mark had worn a blazer with elbow patches, like he was auditioning to be someone's quirky nephew on a startup sitcom. I knew their closing play. Greg would wine and dine the buyers, while Mark fumbled through architecture diagrams he didn't understand. They dropped buzzwords like containerization and elastic scaling without ever defining them. Then they'd pitch the acquisition like it was a foregone conclusion. "We just need to sign on the dotted line." Except that dotted line didn't mean a thing without me. Laura would go back to her team and pull the full contract set from the diligence portal. Someone, an intern maybe trying to impress, would open Schedule C, scroll to Clause 9, and realize there was a ghost in the machine. All ownership and sale rights subject to active licensing agreement with Cobalt Point Systems, LLC. Transfer restrictions apply. Signature from Brenda L. Owens required for IP conveyance. They'd double-check the platform's tech stack. They'd realize the core modules were still tethered to my original license. They'd see the updated clause, the freeze condition. They'd realize they were trying to buy a product without a clear title. A Maserati with a forged VIN number. A deed with the wrong name on the line marked owner. And it wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be dramatic. It would be one quiet question at the next day's meeting. Could we get some clarification on the licensing structure? That's how the unraveling begins, not with a bang, but a spreadsheet. At home, I poured another glass of wine and opened my inbox. One new message from Kara. Subject, heads up, I think they found it. Just got a weird LinkedIn connection request from a Voltrex compliance officer. Nice move, by the way, I smiled. The whisper had landed. And now the buyer knew something was off. And I was the only one who could set it right. The boardroom smelled like catered ego. You know the kind? Newly printed contracts, overpriced coffee, and men wearing tailored suits who'd never once read a single line of code, but felt entitled to own what other people built. The floor-ceiling windows stretched behind Greg like a TED talk waiting to happen, all sunlit self-importance and reflections of glass towers. A photographer hovered near the back wall, hired to capture the moment. Not a moment, the moment. A culmination of Greg's vision and Mark's leadership. Greg was glowing, actually glowing. He wore his deal jacket, the one he kept dry-cleaned and hung in his office like a damn trophy. Across the table, Mark smoothed the cuffs of his shirt and adjusted his tie 3 separate times. He looked like a boy who'd been dressed by a committee of LinkedIn influencers. The buyer arrived 2 minutes late, flanked by 2 assistants, both sharp-eyed and silent, armed with leather portfolios and attention you could pluck like a guitar string. Laura was among them, expression unreadable, the same way a locked vault is unreadable. She nodded once at Greg, didn't acknowledge Mark at all, and took her seat without speaking. Greg, of course, couldn't help himself. Well, this is a big day, he said, flashing that politician's smile. 2 years ago, this was a prototype hacked together during the lockdown. Now we're looking at a high 8-figure acquisition. Legacy in the making. He gestured to Mark like a proud uncle at a science fair. And this guy right here, he's taken the reins beautifully, couldn't be prouder. Mark chuckled, forced and nasal. All credit to the foundation you laid, Greg. Neither of them noticed when I stepped through the door. I wore black, not for drama, just clarity. No name tag, no intro. I simply walked to the far end of the table and placed a matte black folder down in front of the buyer. Greg's smile twitched. Brenda, he said, didn't know you'd be joining. I'm not, I said, and took a seat in the corner. The assistants glanced at each other. Laura opened the folder. Inside, printed on ivory linen paper, was a single document, my updated licensing agreement, stamped, signed, and very legally binding. The room stilled. It wasn't sudden, it was slow, like someone had turned the volume down on the world. The buyer leaned in. Scanned the first few lines. His mouth didn't move, but something behind his eyes clicked shut. He slid the paper to his left. One assistant read it, then the other. Greg's voice cracked the silence. Everything okay? No response. Mark cleared his throat. If there's anything you're unsure of, we're happy to clarify. Laura raised a hand. Silence again. The buyer finally looked up. Neutral as before, almost bored. But when he spoke, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. We were told the platform was owned outright, that its IP was company property. This, he tapped the folder gently, this says otherwise. Greg reached for the document like a kid caught cheating mid-test. Wait, I think we already handled this. That license was temporary. She was a contractor. It was years ago. I didn't say a word, just met Laura's eyes. She gave the faintest, most imperceptible nod. The buyer folded his hands. If what's in this folder is accurate, and I believe it is, then the platform you're trying to sell is legally encumbered by an active third-party license. Meaning you cannot sell it, at least not without this woman's approval. Greg blinked. That can't be right. That's not, there must be, Mark. Can you speak to that? Mark looked like he'd swallowed a stapler. I thought that was resolved. Didn't legal scrub all the legacy dependencies? The buyer stood. No fireworks, no yelling, just one smooth, clinical movement. Deal's off, he said, unless she is still involved. The silence was thick enough to drown in. Greg opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I stood. Gently picked up my empty folder. I built it, I said, looking straight at Greg. You sold it, but you forgot the part where you never owned it. And then I left, didn't wait for their panic. Didn't need to see Mark crumble or Greg scramble to salvage the ashes. I'd already done what I came to do. They'd walked into the trap smiling. Now they could choke on the paperwork. The moment came with no fanfare, no gasps, no dramatic music swelling like in those corporate docuseries Greg probably dreamed of starring in. It was quiet, almost insultingly quiet. The buyer read the license line aloud, just one. Transfer of platform assets is prohibited without express written approval from Cobalt Point Systems, LLC, licensor, Brenda Owens. Then, God help me, he laughed, not a little chuckle, not a polite huh. A full-bodied, can't believe I'm witnessing this train wreck kind of laugh. The kind that makes boardrooms sweat and PR firms wet the bed. He looked up at Greg, still holding the document like it was an inside joke he wasn't in on. This is hilarious, he said, smiling like a wolf in a Gucci belt. You really tried to sell me a company you don't own. Greg opened his mouth and immediately regretted it. That's not accurate. We reviewed all the legacy licensing. Legal signed off. I was told. He turned to Mark like a man begging a vending machine to work without paying. Didn't we resolve this? Didn't you confirm? Mark looked like he'd forgotten what air was. I thought the license lapsed once she left, he stammered. I mean, it's not even in the main repo anymore. The buyer cut him off with one raised hand. Stop, he straightened. folded the document with surgical care, slid it back into the folder. Deal's off, he said, flat, final, the sound of a guillotine dropping on a velvet cushion, unless she is still involved. Greg blinked so fast I thought he was buffering. Look, this is a misunderstanding, he tried. Brenda was a contractor during the initial build-out, yes, but that license was symbolic. We've rebuilt the entire stack since then. She's not part of the ongoing roadmap. Mark here, he's the lead now, the architect. The buyer didn't even look at Mark. He looked at me, still seated, still silent, still calm. He gave the faintest nod, then turned back to Greg. We don't buy ghosts, he said. We acquire control. And right now, you don't have it. And just like that, the air changed. Greg looked like a balloon 3 seconds after the pin. Not popped, sagging, all that fake confidence, all that ego-starched bluster collapsing into one stunned exhale. I stood slowly, smoothed my jacket. The folder was still in the center of the table, glowing like a cursed artifact. Greg, I said quietly, you might want to call your legal team, and your investors, and your reputation manager. He blinked again, throat clicking like he wanted to swallow pride but found it too dry. I never wanted to blow this up, I added. But you made the mistake of thinking silence equals surrender. The buyer stepped back from the table. You'll hear from us, he said, addressing me this time, if you're still open to negotiations. I gave him a nod, not a smile, not yet. Behind me, Greg was still frozen in his own personal Greek tragedy. The deal he thought would be his swan song, his legacy, now lay on the table like a body in a chalk outline. Mark muttered something about checking with compliance, but nobody was listening. Because the room no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me. And as I walked out, weightless and unbothered, I left them exactly what they'd tried to take from me, silence. Only this time it was the loudest sound in the room. The office was quiet. None of the startup razzle-dazzle, no neon mission statements, no beanbags, no espresso machine that costs more than a car. Just polished concrete, glass walls, and the kind of silence that carries weight. The kind that says, we don't scream to be taken seriously, we whisper and people listen. Laura greeted me with a nod and waved me toward the end of the hallway where the buyer sat in a conference room already halfway through a sparkling water. He stood when I entered, no photographer, no handshakes for the press. This wasn't about theatrics. He slid the folder across the table. Revised terms, he said, calm, crisp, we've removed the noise, added value where it belongs. I opened the folder. Top page, full licensing rights for Cobalt Point Systems, LLC, my company, my name, listed in 14-point font where Greg's used to be in 12. Second page, board seat, permanent, voting. Not honorary, not ceremonial, not the kind they offer to appease someone after a scandal. Real. Third page, new valuation. 5 times what Greg negotiated. I blinked once slowly and let the numbers sink in. Not because I was surprised, I wasn't. I knew the product was worth it, I made it worth it, but because it felt good to see the proof. Black ink on white paper. No gaslighting, no shared credit, no praise with an asterisk. The buyer cleared his throat gently. You'll notice Greg's name has been removed entirely. No equity, no seat. Nothing tied to future deliverables. I nodded. And Mark? Didn't seem necessary, he said. We prefer builders, not mascots. I let out a quiet breath, not laughter, just release. There was a pen already resting next to the agreement. Sleek, heavy, corporate. I ignored it, reached into my bag, pulled out the one I brought. It was the same black Pilot G2 I'd used to draft the original API flow in a diner during the pandemic. Still had a scratch on the side from where it once rolled off my dashboard. Still wrote like a charm. I signed slowly, deliberately. Initials, signature, date. The buyer stood and extended a hand. Welcome aboard, I shook it. Then slid the folder back and said, your protege can start his own company. I capped the pen, slipped it back into my bag. This one's mine. He smiled, nodded, and left me alone in the room. The final image burned itself into memory. My name on the agreement, my LLC on the license, my future no longer borrowed, no longer begged for, just owned. No applause, no toast. Just a woman at the end of a long war, finally closing the last chapter with the pen they forgot she still held. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.